Welcome to Recalculating Small Business. Like its award-winning book, Recalculating is dedicated to small business in America. Your hosts are Don Mazzella and Dan Perkins. Don Mazzella is the editor-in-chief of the Small Business Digest. Dan Perkins is a registered investment advisor with 43 years' experience in managing money.
Dan Perkins here, your co-host, along with Don Mazzella of Recalculating for Small Business. Our radio program is dedicated to you, helping the small business owners increase their profits. We draw our name from Recalculating, voted the best small business book of 2017 by the Independent Press. In this book, it features ways to grow your small business. Now, here's Don Mazzella.
My co-host, Dan Perkins, is on assignment. Well, we're lucky today. We have Stuart Vener joining us. He wears many hats, including being head of 24/7, which is the network that you hear our programs are. And we also found, quite by accident, happily for me, that he also has another very interesting business, which I want him to talk about. Buy your timeshare. And since I was involved with a timeshare, I can really appreciate it. Stuart, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Don. It's a pleasure to be on. So you were a victim of the timeshare people.
Well,
I shouldn't laugh.
I don't necessarily, and we'll be happy to go into it. But before we do, Stuart, tell us a little bit about your background personally, and then how you got involved with Buy Your Timeshare.
I'd be delighted. I'm kind of old, so I'm going back into a little ancient history, Don. But for many years, I owned a mortgage company in Los Angeles County, and at the time, I was actually the second largest dollar volume mortgage company in LA County, and that's not a small county by any means. Well, back in 1998 was the first real estate crash. That's when the S&Ls went under, and everybody was underwater and upside down, and it was probably one of the most depressing times to be in the mortgage business, because all I was doing all day long was telling people that they owed more than their house is worth and we couldn't help them, which is a horrible thing to have to do. And at that time, we then started a company that got people out of over-encumbered real estate with the least amount of problems. And that ran for till almost 2000, and that ran for a long time, almost 10 years. And then that stopped when the things recovered, things got better. Then back in 2008, I was not doing mortgages at the time, although I know that business pretty well. But we started a company offering seller-funded down payment assistance with FHA loans. And our industry, I was the second company to ever do this. The first one was a company called Nehemiah Housing. And at the time that George Bush signed a law stopping seller-funded charitable donations, we were responsible for about 41% of all the HUD loans that were out there on homes. That's a lot of property. And at the time that we did that, Don, we had a 501c3 charity, and we thought it would be nice to, raise a little other money aside from just the seller-funded money to help more people get down payment assistance. We gave away, I might say, over $100 million in down payment assistance during that time. So that was a lot of money. And I thought, well, how can we fundraise? I'm not going to have tea parties. Nobody's going to give me money because they like me. And I found that timeshares, people would do anything to get rid of them. They're the worst investment in the world. So that's when we started accepting donations of timeshares, and I was taking them as donations because we could actually sell them at that time on eBay for $200-300. Once in a while, maybe we'd get real lucky and somebody would pay it for $500. But today, unfortunately, there is no market. These timeshares are all on eBay for $1, and nobody's buying them, Don. And I want to tell your audience out there, if you don't own a timeshare, don't buy one. They are the worst absolute deals in the world. They have no investment value. You can go on Hotels.com, Orbitz, you can go in anywhere, and you'll pay a lot less for your vacation. You can pick where you want to go, you can pick when you want to go, and they'll empty the trash. That's how bad they are.
Well, you're talking to somebody who bought a timeshare in St. Martin.
Okay.
And we bought it in 1996. And for about 10 years, it was worth it because what happened, the airfares, relatively speaking, were reasonable from New York to St. Martin. And we invariably got 1 or 2 extra weeks out of it.
That's
a
nice.
variety of ways. So,
were you on the Dutch side or the French side?
Always the Dutch side. You do not want to go on the French side, except to visit. And
look at the topless girls, of course.
Well, you know, after a while, that even gets old. But
it does. It does.
As does you. But the point is, St. Martin is the most revisited island in the Caribbean, and it is absolutely, to my way of thinking, the best island in the Caribbean.
The best beaches. They are the best beaches.
Make a long story short, for about the first 10 years, when you did all the math, it worked. The second 9 years, up until the devastating hurricane of last year,
yes,
it was a break even, and we probably lost. As you say, it would have been better to go someplace else. But we went there. We knew the people. We knew the beach. We knew everything about it, and it was the one. And since it required us to go that week at a time when I would not give up work, being a 24/7 type guy, it forced me to take a vacation, and that's why we did it. But then we had the hurricane that totally obliterated St. Martin. But ironically, our place, the Atrium, was the one hotel that suffered very little damage. It was built. It was the way it was built and where it was built. It suffered no damage. At least they said that at the beginning. And then, as the weeks went by, they kept saying that there was more and more damage. Then they had the Dutch Marines staying there, and if you know anything about Marines, they're not going to be very nice with the furniture.
That's for sure.
Then they put up that they wanted $1,000 from everybody, and then when you figured out the cost, they could rebuild a house for what they were getting back from them. So we're in litigation. But the point was, before the hurricane, realized it was no longer a good deal. So we were looking to get rid of it, and there's no way you can really get rid of it. So,
what I would do if I were you is walk away from it. You're subject to Dutch law. There's nothing they can do to you here.
Yeah. Well,
I would walk away from it.
Well, that's what we, in effect, have done.
That's the right thing to do.
But there are people, like we have a friend who has 5 weeks there, and they're, anyway, it's a sad situation. But let's get back to it. Why do you think it's still a bad situation for our audience?
Well, the main problem is, and let's talk primarily about timeshares here in the United States, because that's what most of them really are that we deal with. And I don't care which company it is, it should be illegal because they're really defrauding people out of their money. Number one, they're selling it as an investment. And I can tell you right now, it has no resale market whatsoever. None of them. I don't care if you're buying it from Wyndham. I don't care if you're buying it from Diamond, Westgate. They are worthless. If you really insist on buying one, buy it on eBay for $1, or they may even pay you to take it. They have no markets. But there is, you mentioned something which is very interesting, because there is a liability, a contingent liability that goes along with every timeshare, because you are responsible for the maintenance, the repairs, anything on these properties, anything that needs to be done. And if you remember, was it last year, the year before, the big hurricane that hit Orlando really bad? Was that Charlie, I believe?
Yes.
And there was one large timeshare in, it's a suburb of Orlando in Volusia County, but it fell into a sinkhole. I mean, it's a mess. And they made a change in Florida sinkhole insurance, and I don't think that they cover this. I just don't think that it's protected. So you've lost the entire building. So what do? They figure that they spread the cost out among all the other unit owners. And that's a horrible assessment. There's no tax deduction in a timeshare. You can't sell it. And I have people call me, they pay $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 for these things, and you can't get anything for them. And now there's another little cottage industry that's sprung up similar to what we're doing. And I was one of the first people helping people get out of timeshares. And I don't charge a lot of money for this. I charge less than what typically what a year's maintenance fee would be. But there are people that are charging $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, and they can't do anything different than I do. And basically, what we do, and the only way to get out of it, is to transfer ownership out of your name. Now, how do you do that? You don't want to give it to your kids. If there's somebody you really don't like, you can give it to them. Give it to Barack Obama. That'd be great. Give them all the timeshares. But you can't just give a timeshare to someone because they don't have to accept it. You see what I'm saying? It's treated like any piece of real estate. What you own is a fractional interest in a condominium. It's like there's this condo in a hotel, and you own it along with 50 other people. Something like that. And you do have the legal right to sell that property or to give the property away or to do anything you want with it. And you do not need permission from the association. You do not need permission from the management company. In the United States, you have the right to sell what you own. Okay?
So, but who do you sell it to?
You sell it to our Delaware corporation. And that's how we get people out of it. We take ownership in the timeshare. And when we have ownership, I send the recorded deed copy to the resort or to the management company. And I tell them very simply that we are now the owners. The only people you can deal with are us because we are the owner, not Mr. Jones, who used to own it. He doesn't own it anymore. It's a recorded instrument. It's a matter of public record. And we are giving them an option. They can have it back at no cost, or they can foreclose on it. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me, Don. They can do whatever they want with it. If they're smart, they'll take it back, but most of them don't. Because they don't want them. They don't want them for nothing.
But then don't they sue you for the maintenance, etc.?
You really can't do that. In the state of Florida, for example, they now foreclose on timeshares non-judicially, like a trust deed sale, which is what's done in California on all real estate, and they cannot seek a deficiency judgment. All they can get is the property back, which I've offered it to them in the first place. But all they can do is get ownership to the property. And what this will do will keep a foreclosure off of the credit of the previous owner. And there's another kind of an interesting thing. This is a little nuance. Let's take a hypothetical case where Mr. Jones owns a timeshare, California, Florida, anywhere, okay? Mm-hmm. He owes $15,000 on it. It's worth nothing. We take ownership. We do what is called an assumption between us of the mortgage. Now, why do we do this? Number one, they're not going to be able to get any money from him, or they're not going to get any money from us. All they're going to get is the property back, but they have no choice at that point but to write off that $15,000 debt. Now, if somebody does this wrong, if they just walked away from it themselves and didn't care about the credit hit, they're going to get a 1099-C for cancellation of debt because the lender, in that case, typically the resort, because nobody else is going to buy the paper. They all carry their own paper because they can't sell it on a secondary market. So they're going to get a 1099-C for that $15,000 that they're going to have to declare as ordinary income. That's worse than the credit hit, frankly.
Right.
because the IRS isn't going to go away. The credit will get better, but the IRS is not going to go away. No. So by doing this through us, it has worked 100% of the time, and no one has had to pay income tax on cancellation of debt. And now, I had mentioned previously when we first started talking, just briefly, how we got people out of over-encumbered real estate through 2 real estate crises, the last one just ending not too long ago. Mm-hmm. And it was the same principle, the same system that we did. In fact, at one time, I think we owned half of Apple Valley or Victorville, California. We had so much property there that was so upside down. And I can say, and I'm sure I would know it if it happened, that not one person has had to pay tax on cancellation of debt. And there we're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, we would take a house with a $500,000 mortgage that was worth $2 million. You're dealing with some big numbers.
Oh, very, very definitely. Well, I hadn't even thought about cancellation of debt, and then it becomes a tax liability. I really hadn't thought about it.
Most people don't. Now, I don't know how that would affect you in St. Martin. I'm really not sure. Under Dutch law, if they'll even send you that, I doubt it.
Well, they haven't done a thing. Neither my wife nor I have ever walked away from a debt, but it just did not seem.
It's a business decision. You're doing the right thing if you do. It's a business decision.
It's one that you're always fraught with danger. When I'm a member of I'm on the board of directors of a nonprofit medical marijuana here in New Jersey, and when I joined the board, they did the state troopers did a background check. It was so thorough that they came up with a lawsuit that neither my accountant, my attorney, or I had ever heard of. And you sit there, and I said to him, quite honestly, I had never heard of the lawsuit. It was in some, I think it was Texas or some state that they declared to judgment, but I never heard anything further but that. And I've been told that things like that are in many people's lives without really knowing it until you do a background check like this. But
sure.
But and what do you charge for this service?
I charge $999. So it's, as I say, it's typically less than what the maintenance fees would be for most timeshares.
Mm-hmm. But is it like per timeshare? If you have 5 weeks, 5 times that, or is it just whatever?
It's per transaction because it would be on the same deed.
Mm.
I mean, if someone had 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, we would have parcel 1, parcel 2. We're good at preparing deeds. I've done deeds in every county that you can think of in the United States.
But why do you get into
I even
it?
did once, and I did one once in St. Martin, but it was very tricky. If I remember right, I don't think I'd want to do it again.
Oh,
it's very complicated to record over there.
Well, in St. Martin in the early 50s and late 50s, early 60s, a whole group of Pan American airline people bought condos and cabins in a development near the airport, and it was destroyed in a hurricane, and it took them 20 years to work out the details, and every one of those Pan Am employees lost their money in it.
Incredible.
It was still there, the remnants of it. You drove through it, and I happened to know somebody that was a Pan Am. And ironically, I ended up doing a story on it many years later because it was also part of the Pan Am Credit Union. It was a really interesting story. So let's get into, for instance, Marriott just separated out its timeshare business. They said because they wanted it to be on its own. But if it's so bad, why do people buy it?
Well, that's an interesting story, Don. They use the most sophisticated high-pressure sales techniques that I've ever seen in my life. You go down there, they offer you a free weekend. Say in Orlando, that's where so many of them are sold. And they'll give you a free weekend, they'll give you free tickets to Disney, but they don't tell you have to sit through a 5-hour sales presentation. And they lock the door, they don't want to let you out. It's the hardest sale. It's hard to resist. It really is. In fact, many years ago, if I tell you kind of a funny story, I was a kid. I was like in my mid-20s, just married, and my father was in the cowboy hat business, and he knew Roy Rogers from the cowboy stuff.
Right.
And at the time, Roy Rogers owned the Apple Valley Inn, which is near Victorville, California, near San Bernardino. Give a little bit of reference. And my father gave me this whole sales pitch on how wonderful the Apple Valley Inn and how I should go there. So my wife and I were kids. We go to the Apple Valley Inn, and we check in, and then we go to a free cocktail party that was run by the real estate company, the Apple Valley Real Estate Company. And then it didn't take me too long to realize I think we were the only people that were actually paying for a room in this place. And it was just an unbelievable hard sales pitch. And it was the same concept. They were selling land in the middle of the Mojave Desert, which is still in the middle of the Mojave Desert. But it was the same concept as the timeshare sales. It's just a really high-pressure, hard sale. And it's not easy to resist.
But yet you turn around. I don't know if you remember Rio Rancho Estates outside of Phoenix, which was literally. But the point is, those homes are now 50 years later really a really great subdivision outside of I believe it's Phoenix. I'm pretty sure. But the point is, it can happen. There are very few. It's ironic. I grew up in Newark, and there are many people from Newark paid that $10 down and $10 a month for their retirement home. And it's amazing how many people from Newark are ensconced in that area. But that's another time.
Well, that's how Florida was developed. Remember with the guy selling swampland back in the 20s and 30s? Yes. Today it's good property.
Yes. It's a very... one man's mud is another man's fertilizer. But
that's
anyway, but you also now have 24/7, the network that we're on. How did you get into that, and why?
Well, we went into the radio business. I was doing shows, and we started this radio company. Jason, who is my right-hand man, who is a great engineer, was working for another company, and we became friends, and we said, let's start a radio station. That was about 6 years ago. I guess it's been at least that long. And today we have, I think, the best station out there. We are full. I'll tell you the truth. We have no open spots to speak of right now. We are almost 100% full, and we have great shows like yours, Don. I have to say yours is a great show. I'm working harder now than I've ever done in my life, but I'm enjoying it. I like every minute of it. I really enjoy the work. I don't enjoy the timeshare business. I have to tell you the truth. I like getting people out of a problem because you feel good after that, but it's not a fun business. The radio business is a great business. I enjoy it.
Yeah. Well, it is, and obviously we enjoy being on 24/7. You're now on 12 over the air. You now have the streaming, etc. The ironic part is, I went to the podcast convention in Philadelphia, and for listeners, it was an experience that I look forward to going next year. But the interesting thing is, the industry right now is based on downloads rather than what is important, which is streaming. And frankly, we're stuck in the middle of this thing because we being Dan Perkins and I are stuck in the middle of this because people only value our downloads, but not our streaming.
Well, a download is kind of a misnomer, I think. Uh, when you say download, we podcast on our own podcasting on about 12 other places, iTunes, iHeart, and so we have a lot of listeners. But most people don't actually download the show. Nobody downloads, hardly ever. What downloading means is you're actually saving that show to your computer to listen to all the time. And we only have one show that gets a ton of downloads, but it's kind of a wacky show. It gets a lot of listeners, too, but it's somebody who talks to dead people. And it's kind of a strange audience, and they actually download this stuff. But most people really don't download the show to your computer, but they get a lot of listeners. We can ping the number of listeners that we get, and it's a pretty sizable number, because every time someone goes on, we get a ping. We know we can track that.
Well, we know that, and at the convention I was talking, but it was like talking Swahili to these people. They looked at me as if I was talking a totally different language. Well, how many downloads do you have? And just really fascinating. Hopefully the industry will mature and understand that streaming is the key. But until then, as you know, well, we're going along, and we feel strongly that we're presenting a program that people want to hear. And by the way,
you do.
Jason, who does a terrific job, and we have guests like yours. It's an interesting time. I don't know if you're aware, but I started out as a copy boy at NBC News many years ago.
I didn't know that.
In the glory days, I covered JFK. I was part of the team. JFK assassination. Wow. That's how far back I go. And I've been in and out of this industry for over 50 years. And I've watched it change radically.
It is becoming more and more Internet-based. I'll tell you, I think the whole world is becoming that way. Although there'll always be people in their car listening to the radio.
Yes. But it's interesting. CBS here in New York has just discovered that more people listen to the program via their computer than they do via their radio.
I believe that. That is absolutely correct. It's going to be even more so that way. Yes. I think the only time I listen to my radio is driving.
Well, that was the case, but lately I've gotten to the point where, given the radio, there's a commercial every 2 minutes. I've even turned that off, and I just don't like OnStar yet, and all the other services that have it without commercials. We're almost coming to the end. Stuart, if someone was interested in a podcast or any of your time sharing, how do they reach you and your audience? And your
well, they can
customers?
Always go to the radio station at amfm247.com, or if someone is stuck with a timeshare, I'll be more than happy to talk to them. Go to buyyourtimeshare.com, or they can call me at 877-255-1074. And, they don't have, there's no obligation, there's no hard sale, but I'll be glad to try to explain to them just what their situation is, because one thing you don't want to do is do it the wrong way and end up owing the IRS a big bill. That's
true.
That's not the person you want to owe.
No, it's interesting. I heard a commercial. Well, I don't know whether it was your group or another group on CBS about a month ago, and I actually answered it to talk about my timeshare. But the point you made, which I had never even thought about, is the fact of the canceled debt obligation.
Yes.
But if it's the United States timeshare, you definitely have that. But you don't know about the Dutch foreign side.
I don't think you'll have it over there. If you have a Dutch timeshare or a Mexican timeshare, I don't think you're going to have that problem because you're totally subject to their law. I've read some of these Mexican timeshare contracts, and they're written in beautiful English, the King's English, and you'd think that it was right here in this country, but it's very clear that all venue and jurisdiction is in the District Federal of Mexico or something like that. So I don't think you're going to have that problem with the tax liability if it's not in this country.
Well, our timeshare is owned by Festiva in South Carolina.
They're managing it. They don't own it. I think if you read your contract real closely, it's subject to Dutch law.
Yes, that's it. But the interesting thing we found out that it's subject to Attorney General action in 7 states here in the United States. They have a facility in North Carolina.
They're all being sued. They're all being sued. They should be taken out. They should be out of business. They should not be allowed to do what they do, but they do.
Well, it's been illuminating.
I hope so.
It's always a pleasure talking to you.
Same here, Don.
I'm the word I want to say, I'm selfish because listening to you, I always learn something. We've been talking with Stuart Vener. A link to his website will be on recalculating.com .biz tonight, where you can hear this and every other past and present Recalculating show. So, Stuart, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, my friend, and you love your show. I listen to it every week.
Want to know more about health savings accounts for your company or yourself? Go to 2hsa.com and get a free employer's primer. Health savings accounts are a cost-effective way of offering health care benefits to your employees and yourself. HSAs build retirement funds for your employees, improve morale, and reduce your health care benefit cost. For a free employer guide to HSAs, go to 2hsa.com. That's 2hsa.com.
Dan Perkins here from Recalculating.biz with your featured book. I want to tell you about a recent interview I had with Bob Bethel, a turnaround specialist with lots of success in small business. Bob's new book is Strengthen Your Business, Fail-Proof Strategies for Small Business. He tells us of his life successes and failures that have made him and his clients so successful. Over the years, Bob has brought 77 companies back from the brink and changed them into thriving, profitable businesses. His energy is amazing, and at 74, he proves that you can still have a great deal to give others if you just try. His suggestions are easy to understand and very helpful. One insight struck me was that most companies do not have a plan. The old Chinese proverb says, if you don't know where you're going, then any road will take you there, is true today. Bob Bethel's book, Strengthen Your Business, can be found at Amazon.com or can be ordered at your local bookstore. This has been Dan Perkins with your Recalculating.biz featured book.
Welcome back to Recalculating, the program dedicated to American small business. Now it's time to bring together our 2 experts, Dan Perkins and Don Mazzella, as they discuss things that are happening now that are affecting your business success.
My co-host, Dan Perkins, is on assignment, but we're lucky enough today to have Chris Jones joining us. Chris and I share one thing. When we were younger, we just thought that space exploration would expand beyond the moon, beyond Mars, and to the stars. It hasn't happened, and some people are worried about it because space exploration has really led to a lot of innovations in life that has made our life easier and more profitable. Chris, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
And Chris, tell us, we're talking with Chris Jones. Tell us a little bit about your background and why space exploration is so important to you.
Actually, I was a former software engineer. I did that for about 20 years and basically was coding for the most part. And then I took a sort of a retirement from that and decided to go into sci-fi authoring and wrote 2 books. First one being Reversion, Reset the Future, and then the second one being Reversion, Lost in Time. As far as space, why I think we need to continue exploration is there's a lot of values that we have gained over the years as a result of space exploration. When we went to the moon, we had a goal of going to the moon. We had a lot of things going into technology to make it possible for us to go to the moon. A lot of the advances that we have right now, like our cell phones, our iPads, even some of the stuff that we use with our computers for that matter, all of that came through advancements of the space program. In addition, I mean, I always dreamt of being able to go out into space. I want to be one of the first ones to step on Mars. Of course, now it's a little late for me to do that, but I still dream of that possibility, and I'd like to see us get there in my lifetime.
I couldn't agree with you more. It's funny, Chris, when President John Kennedy announced we were going to the moon by the end of the decade, the only question was, did he mean 1969 or 1970 as at the end of the decade? I remember that. I'm old enough to have covered that event down at what was then Cape Canaveral. There's a lot to space exploration. Just recently, what I thought were 2 very interesting things happening. Number one was the fact that we are starting a space force. Whether that means the first step towards militarization, we don't know. But just recently, they've discovered ice on the moon. All of these things I find encouraging, and hopefully we will find the footing again. What are your thoughts on the chances of us spending the money to go beyond the moon and beyond Mars?
Well, I'm a little concerned about where we're trying to spend our money. The first, when Trump announced that he wanted to do a space force, I was kind of wondering what he meant by that. Was he talking about militarization, or was he talking about going out and actually doing exploration with that? And I'm not really sure I know the answer to that yet. If it's for exploration, then I applaud it, and I look forward to seeing what we do with it. If it's just for plain militarization, I'm not really sure that's a good space to use our money at. As far as the water on the moon, I find that encouraging, but we've also found that there are ice caps on Mars, and even Europa, I think, was one of the moons of Jupiter, I think. But in any case, we found that, and it's just one of the few requirements for life. So the question is it possible that life could exist there? It's very possible, considering that the water.
Well, before we go to our topic, since this is a program of small business, but let's go to the question that I often get in some of the. Do you think that there's life somewhere else in this universe of ours?
Well, I like to quote a movie that I particularly liked. The name of the movie was Contact, with Jodie Foster, and that statement was, if there, in all the billions of stars and billions of billions of planets, if there's no other life than what's here on Earth, it'd be an awful waste of space.
What a great line, but often true. Of course, it's frightening whether those are as warlike as we are, and whether they'll stay at their home planet. But since we really are a program about small business, let's talk about how small business has benefited from the space program in the past. I mean, I often say to my class, there's more power in your iPhone than what put us onto the moon. What are your thoughts on that, Chris?
Well, I tend to look at it like this. It was what the scientists did to get us to the moon, to actually, be able to communicate and to put the computers on the ship, and how they actually were able to control the ships going to the moon, that made it possible for us to even have computers in the first place. And then miniaturization of the computers, getting to the point now where you've got them into iPads, along with the communication systems similar to what they used then. We're using those now for the mobile towers. So all of that played into this. It wasn't directly the same, but it was the start of all of this. Without it, we may not even have what we have technologically speaking.
Well, I agree. Yeah, I was talking to a group of small business owners last week, and they said how now 90% of what before they had to have staff to do, they can now do on their computers with far less staff, and in fact farm out a lot. And some of that, as one person pointed out, and it's one of the reasons why I asked you on the program. He said a lot of that was developed in the building of the space program. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, most all of it was. In fact, I would say a good 90% of how it started came from that, and then a lot of it went out to Silicon Valley after that to keep it miniaturized and get it smaller and make it available in much smaller forms, with Apple and the different vendors that are out there now that are benefiting from that and actually selling mobile phones and making them available to people. That's a huge advantage that we've had because of the space program.
We're talking with Chris Jones. He's a science fiction author. He spent 20 years being a coder and developer. Chris, do you have a website?
Yes, I do. It's http www.christopher-allen-jones.com.
That's a long one, but Christopher-allen-jones.com. But at least you got all your names in there.
I tried to shorten it, but they didn't have. All of the other ones were used.
Yeah, that's the trouble with having a common name. See, when you go to Mozilla, there's no problem at all. No one had that name. But anyway, getting to this, I mean, we're sitting here, you and I, as our audience knows, I'm a lot older. And when I was a kid, we just assumed we would all go to the moon, to Mars, and beyond. It's not happening. But as someone said to me recently, there's actually been a revolution on Earth. because when we were kids, a small business had to do a lot by hand, and now we're all doing it by computer. What can you give some examples of how you've seen this develop, so that people can see the relationship between space and small business?
Well, as far as small business is concerned, it's pretty much what you were indicating already, but from my own personal experience, I can tell you that it has turned writing a book into a much simpler process. In the old days, you type it out, and then you make mistakes, you go through and you handwrite corrections, and then you go and retype it and make corrections, update the story, retype it again. Nowadays, you type it into a computer. It has its own word processor that does spell checking and even grammar checking, so you can bypass a lot of that stuff, and then at that point, you're just focusing on the story and making it make sense to the people. And you don't have to do a retype every time. You just build on the original.
How very true. To me, the real thing about it is as they even have writing programs now that help you write the book. I've tried them, but I haven't had much success at it. But
they've got them. They've got programs that actually do voice recognition. So if I wanted to write the story as if I was telling it, it would actually do it for me.
Well, but Chris, let me ask you.
I ain't as confident about that, but it is something I might try soon. Go ahead.
No, we're here talking. What I like about our program is that we can bring people in for different. But I'm going to ask you kind of a different question. What made you decide to write science fiction, and what have you learned from it?
Well, to be perfectly honest with you, science fiction was always the genre of choice for me anyway. I love science fiction. Been into just about everything that I can think of, and these stories actually didn't come up recently. I started dreaming them up when I was about 16 years old. So it took me the better part of 30 years to actually write these stories. And the two stories the two books that I actually mentioned earlier are actually a part of a series. And the series actually should be, when completed, 5 books. So,
how far along?
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask, how far along are you in the 5 books? When is the next one coming out?
The third, I'd say about halfway through the third novel, and been a little slow on getting back to writing it with some of the other things that are going on in my life right now, and it hasn't really developed as quickly as the last 2, but I'm still expecting to get it completed before the end of the year and hopefully get it published by mid-year next year.
That's a laudable schedule. But let me ask you a question. I always say it's amazing how the science fiction writers of the 40s, 50s, and 60s predicted so many of the things that have come to pass. If you think about it, they talked about the universal data bank, all of the stuff that we now take for granted. When they were postulated back then, when you and I were a lot younger, they were science fiction. Now they're reality. What do you say to that?
Yep. I think a lot of advancement comes from ideas that come out of books, science fiction books, because I tend to think that a lot of those engineers that are actually working at these new inventions, probably read a lot of science fiction and got a bunch of ideas out of those books when they were reading them. And that's probably how a lot of this stuff developed. Now, that's not saying that it can actually work exactly as we read about it in science fiction, but I do believe that there are things that you can actually glean out of a science fiction novel that will possibly come out and actually become real at some point.
You know, I was watching, a friend of mine has every month a movie night where he runs old movies. He has a vast collection of old movies. And he's running a Buck Rogers serial. I don't know if you, with Buster Crabbe, Buck Rogers in the War of the Worlds. I don't know if you remember those series. As a kid, I saw them. But anyway, the episode we saw this past weekend had Buck and the three other people going into this chamber and disappearing and then reappearing in another chamber in another part of the planet. And you know, this serial was done in 1936. And now, you know, you jump forward to Star Trek, and now everybody, it's just a matter of figuring out how to do it, but a transporter room, etc. And I sat there, I had forgotten that, and I said, gee, everything old, everything new, what is it, everything old is new again, and they just recycled that. And I found that fascinating. That's all I was going to say to this story. It just, I seldom get a chance on this program to talk science fiction, but I'm enjoying talking with you. But for our audience, how do you write? Do you write in the morning? Do you set a quota for yourself? How do you set about writing a book?
The last two novels that I wrote sort of ad hoc. It was, I'd sit down at one point in the day, and it's been 3 or 4 hours, sometimes more, just writing and rewriting. And then each of those novels, actually, I finished in just under 3 months. And eventually, when I got them published, it took me about 6 to 9 months. The current one, actually, I started it early or mid last year. I've had some things going on with my father and his health and issues and other issues of my own that have sort of delayed that, and it's made it a little harder for me to sit down with it. And so now it's more or less ad hoc on the weekends and when I have a little more time. But like I said, I'm about halfway through this book, and I think, to be honest with you, that I'll have it released ready to go by the end of the year.
Well, how did you find the publisher?
That's not easy. The company that I went with is one that's advertised a lot. It's called Page Publishing. I actually did go the traditional route for a little while, but at some point I decided that, with the amount of money that I would lose to a intermediary, I figured it didn't really make much sense for me to go the traditional route. It made more sense for me to just find my own publisher and do it that way.
No. That's a good way of doing it. We're talking with Chris Jones. Chris, before we leave you, the title of your 2 books?
First one is Reversion, Reset the Future, and Reversion, Lost in Time. And both reversions ends with the letter E.
Okay, and people can find it where?
You can buy them on Amazon, Google Play, even the Apple Store, for that matter. And It's pretty much online and just about every major vendor that sells novels.
Okay. Really enjoyed having you on the program, Chris Jones. A link to your website will be on recalculating.biz tonight, where you can hear this and every other recalculating program. Chris Jones, thank you so much for being with us.
Appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Tell me, Dan, tell me about your latest book.
My current book that's coming out, I should say, is Why Can't Grammy Remember Me? And it's really the first book written for children between the ages of 9 and 12 and their families dealing with dementia. Dementia is a growing problem with the elderly in the United States and around the world, and we are not very well informed about what's going on, what's happening. So I wrote this book in the form of a mystery. And I have two little girls, 9 and 12, who have a magical power to seem to be able to find things that are lost. And so they go to their dads and moms and they say, we work all over the neighborhood helping people find things, and we seem to find things. And their dad says, yes, you have a magical talent to do that. And they said, we'd like to start a business to see if we can help other people. So they decided to start a business. The two girls' names are Hudson and Charlotte, and they start H&C's Lost and Found. If you've lost it, we find it. And so they build a business, and they convince the dads to build them an office and a treehouse in the backyard. And they get busy making posters and flyers trying to get customers. And their dads take them downtown, and they put them in the windows and on the telephone poles and light poles. And they go home, and first week goes by, and nobody comes. And the second week and third week, and nobody comes. They're really, really dejected. And the fourth week comes, and there's a knock at the door, and they walk over and open the door, and there's a young man standing there with one of their flyers in his hands. And he says to them, my dad says the reason why my Grammy can't remember me is because she's lost her memory. And your flyer says you find things that are lost. Can you find my Grammy's memory? Well, they don't know anything about memory, so they take his name and they go see their dads to see what can happen. And the story evolves into how they learn about what dementia is and what's going on in the body when somebody has dementia. And then they decide, while they can't find their customer's memory, they can help him build the tools to retain her in his memory. And so at the end of the book, there are about 10 to 12, 13 things that families can do together to work on to preserve the memory of Grandma and Grandpa so the generations can know who these people were.
What a great book. When will it be available, and how can people get it?
Well, it'll be available on Amazon.com. A lot of people who have read it, who've had moms and dads that have been stricken with Alzheimer's or dementia, tell me that they really now begin to understand what's happening in Grandma's brain. And we took a different approach. Rather than do the typical brain cross-section, I work with the artist, and we design highways in the brain. And there's a brain of one of the little girls and the brain of Grammy. They both have highways, roads, but the girl's brain, everything is green and go. Grammy's brain is full of no left turns, do not enter, stop, no right turns. So all of the messages that need to come from our brain get screwed up, and we can't function. Great illustrations, though. Wonderful illustrations.
Well, say goodbye, Dan.
All right.
Time for us to go.
Thank you for joining us. And by the way, if you didn't hear all of today's show, you can go to recalculating.biz, and you can pick up this show and past shows to expand your knowledge as becoming more successful entrepreneurs. Thank you for joining us, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for joining us on Recalculating. We hope the information you received on today's episode was helpful to you in starting and growing your business. Please go to our website, recalculating.biz, to contact us, to listen to past shows, and see special offers. Until next time, remember, if you grow, we grow. Join us next week for more helpful ideas to make your business a great success. Recalculating, a program designed to help you be successful.